Aiden continues to whack every single goblin that comes near him, happily calling for the apocalypse to come or whatever. Jin was in utter shock, witnessing his high school buddy taking down 3 monsters in an instant. As soon as the goblin entered heaven, Aiden noticed something from its body. A golden coin had appeared in the air before him. The moment he held it in the palm of his hands, the system notifies him that this was a goblin coin. Nova's basic currency. Aiden recognizes it as the coins mentioned in the status window from earlier on. The moment he touched it, it disappeared. The system informs him that he had passed the apocalypse trial. He had earned the right to become a citizen of Nova, which meant that all he needed to do was to cross the portal to enter Nova. The boys were confused by what the system meant by a portal, but as they looked around, they chanced upon it. A floating purple and black portal thing in the middle of the air. The scene then changes to show Jin being beaten up, with bruises all over his face as he holds on tightly to a club. He immediately shouts at Aiden, scolding him for suddenly throwing him into a bunch of goblins out of nowhere. It was like he was trying to kill him. But the young barbarian justifies his actions by explaining that the coins he had received were non-transferable. In other words, in order to move on to the next stage, Jin had to earn some coins by himself. Even with those reasons, Jin found it crazy for Aiden to just throw him into a horde of monsters where he couldn't even fight in the first place. But as he was busy scolding the barbarian, one of the goblins was still alive and began charging towards the young fellow. Jin sees it coming and could only scream. With his hands in his pockets, Aiden simply kicks the goblin down, advising Jin that the only way to get stronger is to fight by himself. Having a barbarian on his side, Aiden assures Jin that he wouldn't let him die. Since he got him involved in this place, he was going to take responsibility and help. But even with those words of comfort, Jin was still beaten badly by the monsters. His face was disfigured to the point that his own mother wouldn't recognize him. Seeing that he had no choice, Jin was at least glad that he had completed the quest. In the meantime, somewhere else a pair of people were watching a duffel bag through their binoculars. It turns out to be soldiers, who thought the duffel bag was a trap set by the goblins and decided to hunt them down. Before that, Aiden and Jin had stumbled upon the duffel bag, opening it and seeing that there was a lot of useful stuff in it that the goblins had taken. There was even combat rations, which meant that the boys weren't going to starve for a while. But as soon as Aiden looked up, he was greeted by the sight of a gun barrel pointed directly in his face. The soldiers had emerged from their hiding spot, the bushes, and declared that the goblin bastards were going to die. Luckily they weren't quick to fire, and noticed right away that Aiden and Jin were human beings. Soon enough food was being cooked as the soldiers apologized to the boys for mistaking them as goblins. They sat around the fire together, asking if Aiden and Jin were the only ones here, with no weapons at all. Jin explains to them that they were teleported to this place without even knowing what it was in the first place. Taking the chance, Jin asks them if the apocalypse trials was something that the soldiers were participating in too. If it was, then it meant that everything in the status window was true. The soldier reveals that it was true, and that their government has been preparing for the apocalypse. He informs the boys that the planet Nova where humans will migrate is like the Stone Age, so they needed to work together to build villages. Forward-thinking companies and organizations are also jumping into the Nova pioneering efforts to prepare for the next era. A competition unknown to the general public has already begun. Aiden started to ask some questions himself, wondering if there were many monsters like the ones from earlier in Nova. The soldier tells him that their current place was a kind of testing ground, and Nova is the main stage, which is why it was important for them to train here, as Nova will be even more challenging. After answering the questions, the soldiers even gave the boys more free stuff, as they already had some supplies with them. As they were distributing the items, Aiden kept thinking about the fact that Nova was going to be more challenging, but instead of being afraid, he smiled happily, knowing that he was going to get a chance to hunt even more. In the middle of the night we see the two boys going through some bushes. Jin was complaining to Aiden about why they had to hunt so late, but Aiden counters that with the information from the soldiers, they needed to act right now. They needed to get stronger faster too. Soon enough they chanced upon a tower with a purple light at the top while being guarded on all sides by goblins. Upon a closer look, they could see a very different goblin than the ones they had hunted before. This one was chanting and holding a staff. Jin started to feel afraid. After all, he was facing enemies he hadn't seen before. While Aiden was getting excited, he came to this place after hearing a weird sound and managed to make a winning find. Jin was telling him that the place looked dangerous, But before those words could reach the young barbarian, Aiden had already leapt from their hiding spot. He charges forward with excitement in his eyes, eager to start the hunt, while yelling out Leroy Jenkins. The goblins guarding the tower were too stunned to speak, but before they could do anything, Aiden was already smacking them with his trusty frying pan. Even the goblin at the top had noticed the noise that was coming from below, and looked down. It was alarmed to see a massive human being easily climbing the tower from where it stood while only holding a frying pan in his hand. Aiden was excited beyond his dreams, his eyes focused on the remaining goblin, telling it that he was coming while waving the frying pan in the air. But before he could reach the top, purple lightning started to pour down at where the goblin stood. Seeing what was going on, Aiden realized that it was a mage. Just before a bright flash of light hit his face, it turns out to be a lightning strike. Aiden had taken in the attack at full force. Jin on the ground saw it happen and immediately shouted at Aiden to check if he was okay. The goblin mage was laughing to itself after seeing a human get hit by its spell, but then Aiden's voice could be heard, turning the laughter into shock. With his skin and clothes almost burnt and turned black, Aiden had survived the lightning spell, laughing out loud and calling it electrifying. Seeing that the human was still alive, the goblin mage casted the same spell all over again, and unleashed it onto the young barbarian. Without even moving, Aiden hung onto the tower, taking in all the lightning into his body. He smiles at his current situation, as he could feel his spine tingling, and that this was easy for him. After all, he was not just a barbarian, he was also the son of a great shaman. The moment he made it to the top of the tower, the lightning had turned yellow, covering his body completely, as he raised the mighty frying pan in the air before the goblin mage. He screams at the top of his lungs, "What doesn't kill me, makes me stronger." The single strike that Aiden had let out with the power of lightning coursing through his veins, demolished the very tower he stood on top of. In the aftermath of that attack, he laid on the ground with his arms spread as pieces of the tower fell around him. He admits that this situation was a bit dangerous this time, but he was able to endure the attacks thanks to the magic resistance from his mother's bloodline. As he continued to lay there, the rewards from his hunt appeared in the air above. This time, there was something else besides the gold coins. It turns out to be a mana orb, allowing him to permanently gain a small amount of mana. It can be activated with 10 goblin coins. Seeing in his hand, Aiden wonders if he could get mana like a shaman. But then something else happened. The mana orb he held in his hand started to fly into his body. Soon enough, Aiden was submerged in a golden yellow orb. He could feel a change happening in his body. It felt like a power-up that puts all his previous efforts to shame. Clenching his fist tightly after absorbing the new power, he wonders if this was the power of the orb. Jin finally rushes over to Aiden's side, shocked at the fact that he was still fine after being hit by lightning. Wondering if his friend was really human, instead of being tired, Aiden turns around, his eyes glowing bright red once more, telling Jin that they needed to go hunt even more now. Aiden tells him that they needed to quickly find the next hunting ground. They also needed to especially take down the shaman bastards as they dropped orbs. Hearing the words coming out from his mouth, Jin was in complete horror as he begged Aiden to stop. After night comes morning, Jin emerges from his tent, putting on his glasses as he admires Aiden. It turns out that the young barbarian didn't even go to sleep last night. Instead, he went hunting, resulting in a bunch of orbs with different colors in his hands. Aiden was fired up, proudly showing off that he had gotten orbs for strength and perception, not just mana, and that he couldn't wait to test their power. He continues to be excited, telling Jin about how he had gone insanely strong in just one day. But all Jin saw was a crazy person. In the middle of their talk, the system announces an escape quest, informing the boys that 12 hours have passed in the Apocalypse trial, and that field bosses are now appearing in the Apocalypse trial area. The system informs them that bosses are powerful enemies that novices novas cannot face, so they need to escape as quickly as possible. Jin was completely shocked over the fact that they now got bosses showing up. With a clear mind, Jin tells Aiden that they needed to quickly escape through the portal. But he forgot one thing, and that was the fact that the young barbarian was thirsty for hunts. So instead of being afraid, Aiden was completely excited, his face filled with a pink hue as he smiled happily at the news. Jin could only call his friend a crazy bastard after seeing his reaction. In a different place, the soldiers were seen fighting against a boss Orge Jr. in the beginner trial field. As they continued to fire against it, they recommended focusing their attacks on the hand that was holding the club. But their bullets were ineffective as the Orge simply took them head-on without a scratch. Before long, a dark shadow was cast over the soldiers, as they stood in fear. Seeing the incoming attack, the soldier could only close his eyes, bracing for the pain that was coming and screaming for his mummy. At the very last moment, Aiden makes his appearance, coming in clutch and smashing the Orge's club into pieces with his bare hands. The soldiers were shocked to see who it was that rescued them from death. Aiden stood against the ogre, finding the situation exciting as he was going to fight someone who was a lot bigger than him. He happily tells the soldiers to step aside and got into a fighting stance. After all, this big bad boy wanted to solo fight the ogre.
Thanks for watching the latest part from the voice of Manhwa. Subscribe for more content and don't forget to comment below what you want to see in the future. Like and share for more.